Hello, I'm Dr. Tom Warren, and you're watching The Plant Doctor. This is our March landscape maintenance video. So each month I walk you through what I'm doing in my yard, and this information is going to apply to anybody that's living pretty much in zones 6 through 9, USDA hardiness zones. And this year's a little bit different in the fact that we had a flash freeze occur in my area in December. So I'm going to walk you through some things that are a little bit different than what we did last March, but is very applicable to what needs to be done in March of 2023. So let's go out into the yard and take a look at a few things. So the first thing that I want to start with is not the prettiest thing in the yard by far. We're going to get to the hope that spring's going to be relatively normal, but I want to start with the worst and progress further into what looks better. This is what's left of my azaleas. They do not look good at all, but there's hope. I am finding green vegetative buds on my azaleas. So when the flash freeze came through my area, it burned everything. It burned azaleas, it burned aucuba, it burned tea olive, it burned lower petalums. And we are in the process of recovering from that. I know that it's tempting to go out and think, oh, this is dead, I need to start pruning it a little bit, cut the dead out. Wait on pruning any of your cold damaged material until after it leaves out. You're just adding stress to the plant if you go in and prune right now. So hold off on that. I know it's tempting. I want to do it just as much as anybody else that's watching the channel right now, but it's imperative that we let these plants fully flush out, find the damage. We'll start pruning these back in April and May. But the azaleas, I think they're going to be okay. In my area, I don't think we're going to get any blooms at all. It's just not going to happen. If you're from some people that I've talked to in industry, if you're south of a line of Birmingham, Atlanta, Columbia, South Carolina, I think you're going to have blooms on your azaleas. If you're north of that line, the further north you go, the less likely it is you're going to have blooms on your azaleas here in the spring. My aucubas, I'm seeing some positive things with those, and the fact that they got burned really hard as well. I'm seeing green vegetative growth on my aucubas, so I'm feeling good about aucubas here, right here on the line between zone 7B and 8A. Lower petalums, same thing. They lost all their leaves. However, I've looked, we're seeing some vegetative buds that are popping up on the lower petalums as well. One thing that I am concerned about is tea olives. I have maybe 10 tea olives in my yard. I love tea olives. It's one of my favorite plants. And I'm seeing severe damage. I've done a knife test. I've been doing a knife test maybe once every 2 weeks on my tea olives, and the cambium layer in my tea olives is retreating further and further and further back into the plant itself, to where I'm getting the main branches and I'm not seeing any green cambium underneath the bark. That's concerning to me. They might come back, but I think we're going to have severe damage on tea olive. I think there'll be some severe renewal pruning going on if they come back at all. I hate it, but here again, this was an unprecedented weather event in my area. We had our first ever wind chill warning. So wind chill warning started going out in like the early 2000s, late 90s, somewhere in there. And so it's been like 25 years. In North Alabama, we never had a wind chill warning until December of 2022. We went from, and it's not so much the fact that it got down to 8 degrees where I'm at. Tea olives can handle that, and azaleas can handle that. We went from 54 degrees to 8 degrees in about 3 hours. We had a wind out of the north at like 40 miles an hour at times. We had 40 to 45 mile an hour wind gusts. And the plants just didn't have time to do their biochemical things to protect themselves from that. It happened. I hate it, but we're going to deal with it moving forward here in my yard. We're going to deal with it in your yard moving forward as well. Now that the bad news is over, let's start moving forward. Let's talk about some good things that are happening in my yard and probably happening in your yard as well. This area here is a daylily garden. These are tetraploid daylilies. They're not found anywhere else in the world except my yard. These have been crossbred. And so these are kind of my babies, if you will. A gentleman by the name of Corey Johnson, who owns a daylily farm in Arab, Alabama, kind of got me into these. I was really worried about these after that flash freeze because they're almost semi-evergreen. They never go completely dormant. And when the flash freeze hit, they just all burn down to the ground. But they're coming back. So the daylilies in your yard are probably going to be fine. The same goes with hostas. The same goes with ornamental grasses. I'm seeing some really positive things with those. I'm seeing some buds come up from hostas. I'm seeing some green vegetation in ornamental grasses. Also, now is the time to be transplanting some of those. If you want to transplant, you can divide these daylilies, you can divide grasses, you can divide hostas, you can divide Shasta daisies, you can divide black-eyed Susans right now. They're easy to find right now because they're just now waking up, but they're not putting on so much vegetative growth that we're not going to stress them too much, that if we cut them in half and move part of it somewhere else, that plant's not going to survive. We're in a stage right now in the year where we can dig some of these up, stick them in the ground elsewhere, and you're not really even going to have to water them, because by the time we start getting warm in April and May and June, they're already going to be rooted into the soil anyway. They're going to be getting their own moisture. So if you want to transplant, now is the time to start transplanting some of these plants that we are able to divide in the landscape. I like putting out my mulch and my pine straw in February and into March. I did this just last week, so this was done in the last week of February, putting in this longleaf pine straw here down my right-hand side. If you haven't put down mulch or pine straw, now's a really good time to do it. Reason being is this acts as a natural weed suppressant. So when we get into April, May, June, and you have all these weeds popping up everywhere, you're going to have a much lower weed density if you go ahead and mulch right now. So if you haven't mulched, I would encourage you to go ahead and start mulching your yard, or pine straw. I prefer pine straw in the fact that this yard right here slopes slightly, and mulch has a tendency to float when we get heavy rains. In my area, we get a lot of heavy rains in the spring. It's not unusual to have a 2 or 3 inch rain event, and that mulch would float and be all in the grass right here. Pine straw tends to stay. And so here in my yard, I use pine straw. But if you have a flat yard, you could probably get away with pine bark mulch as well. But this is something you can do. One, it makes your landscape look a whole lot better, but also it acts as a natural weed suppressant. Our deciduous plant material, for example, the oak leaf hydrangea here behind me, also have a forsythia here off my right-hand shoulder. We're not seeing any cold damage on those. They look great. The forsythias have already flowered. They're already starting to leaf out. The oak leaf hydrangea here is starting to leaf out as well. Deciduous perennials like these daffodils here, we're not seeing any damage at all. Anything that went dormant, they're fine. It's the stuff that's evergreen that got popped really hard. Don't prune your oak leaf hydrangeas yet. Don't prune any hydrangeas right now unless it's like a limelight hydrangea. Those bloom on new wood. You can get away with pruning those now, but if you have a Nico blue hydrangea or a oak leaf hydrangea, don't prune right now because you're not going to get any flowers on them. Oak leaf hydrangea in my area is going to bloom in May, and then Nico blues will bloom in June. Prune these after they bloom. If you have forsythia and they've already bloomed out, you can prune them now. I just don't want you pruning now and then you don't have any flowers when they're supposed to flower. That defeats the purpose of having them, right? So don't prune hydrangeas right now unless it's a limelight. You can go ahead and prune your forsythia if it's already bloomed. February is the month to put down pre-emergence on your grass. If you haven't put down pre-emergence on your grass yet, don't panic about that. What you can do is go ahead and put down pre-emergence. It will prevent the weeds that have not germinated yet from germinating in April and May and June. But what you may experience is you may get things like henbit and chickweed. Those early spring weeds will probably be prevalent in your yard. One thing you can do is this to get rid of the henbit and the chickweed and some of those other broadleaf weeds that we see here in early spring. Put a little bit of Trimec in the tank and spray those. However, let me warn you of one thing. If you're at a line, say, Jackson, Mississippi, Montgomery, Alabama, Macon, Georgia, Columbia, South Carolina south, you probably don't want to do that right now. But if you're north of a line, say Birmingham, Alabama, Atlanta, Georgia, and Charlotte, North Carolina, you can probably get away with putting some Trimec down on your grass to prevent the weeds from coming, or to kill the henbit and the chickweed and those other broadleafs that we see that are going to pop up in early spring. The reason you don't want to do that further south right now, as the Bermuda and the zoysia grass begins to green up, you do not want to put down 2,4-D on your yard. You're going to slow down the green up of your Bermuda and your zoysia. Where I'm at here in North Alabama, we can still get away with it. This is zoysia grass you see here underneath my feet. I don't see any evidence of it starting to green up. So I would not have any reservation putting down some Trimec or any other chemical that has 2,4-D in it right now, because it's not going to slow down this zoysia. It's not going to slow down Bermuda grass during that green up period. So here again, if you're further south, say you're zone 8B, 9A, 9B, don't do that. If you're zone 7B and north, you can do that. If you're 8A, you're probably marginal right now. What I suggest you would do is go out and actually pull back the dormant grass. If you see green in there, don't put down any Trimec. But if it's completely dormant, you can go ahead and spray over the top and you should be good to go. So our winter annuals, as you can see, they're almost non-existent. This green vegetation here is pansies, and then I've had some daffodils and some hyacinths in here as well. Did a video on how I installed all this. It was going to be very beautiful. And then we had the flash freeze and the pansies got burned back all the way to the root. Here again, in my area, pansies aren't supposed to get burned back. We got to 8 degrees, yes, but it's the fact we went from 54 degrees to 8 degrees so fast, it burned them back. They are starting to come back a little bit. I've got one pansy that has flowers on it right now. This should be a massive green. Don't panic if your pansies still look like this. I think if you're in 7B, 8A, 8B, you're going to get some color on your pansies in March and especially into April. So on the tail end of pansy season, you should have some color. Guys, as always, thank you for watching The Plant Doctor. And until next time, happy gardening.